It's not often that you can pinpoint the exact origin of a story, but this story, I can tell you the origin. I can tell you the date. It was October the 10th, 2006. And David and I were sitting in our local Cuban Chinese restaurant. I had just ordered my vodka martini when I flipped open my old flip phone, and there on the screen, 16 missed calls from my sister in Boston. David, oh my God, Belinda has phoned 16 times. I hope that nothing has happened to my parents in Johannesburg. I call Belinda. Murray, she says, where have you been all day? I've been trying to call you. I say, what, Belinda? And she says, Mom and Dad, they've been carjacked. They've been held hostage for 3.5 hours. It's like my heart sunk. Belinda, did they touch them? She says, I don't know. Did they rape Mom? She says, I don't know. I run out into the street. It's raining. I call Paul on the phone. I say to him, oh my God, my parents have been carjacked and I don't know whether they touched my mother. I call Johannesburg at 1 o'clock New York time, 1 o'clock a.m. My mother answers the phone. Hi, darling. I say, Mom, how are you? Fine, just fine. Mom, did they touch you? No, they didn't lay a finger on me or your father. So what happened? My parents had gone visiting, and my mom was driving the car because my dad was in the early stages of dementia. She got out of the car to get her purse out of the trunk when all of a sudden another car sped round the corner. 4 armed gunmen jumped out of that car, and with their guns they surrounded my mother. She gave them her engagement ring, she gave them her wedding ring, she gave them her watch. And then, when they saw the headlights of another car approaching, they pushed my mother into the back of her car. My father held captive in the passenger seat of the car. One of them got into the driver's seat, and off they sped. They said to my parents, put your heads down and keep them down. My mother said to me, you know, darling, you only die once. And in that moment, I realized this is how your father and I are going to die. And I felt quite calm. I felt quite at peace. This is how I'm going to die. But she said, then I looked through the gap in the front seats and I saw your father sitting there, looking so bewildered, so frail. And I said to them, please, please, whatever you do, don't hurt my husband. So my mother tells me that her head was down, but it was turned slightly to one side so she could see out the back window, and she saw where they were driving. They were going towards the old, unused gold mines which surround Johannesburg. Now, the drivers had asked my mom if the car had a police tracking device in it, and my mom had said yes, truthfully. And so she realized that they had to get rid of her and my father, because otherwise my parents could have alerted the police, and the police could have found the car. So, just as my mother imagined, they drove her to one of these big, dark fields, no one around, no light, and they said to my mother and father, out the car. They're pushing their guns into my mother and saying, we said get out, but my mother refuses to move, and she says, no, my husband and I are not getting out of this car. You cannot do this to us, and we will not allow you to. And so my mother sat, until these guys called up one of their mates on their cell phone and said, come round, please, and pick up these old white people because they refused to get out of the car. So my parents were transferred into another car that came round to pick them up. And as they set off in the second car, my mother said to this new group of men, tell me, why do you do this? Why are you doing this to us? And the driver said, well, you know, I'm very embarrassed about this, but, you know, since apartheid came to an end, we haven't been able to find jobs, and there are not so many opportunities as we expected. And my mother said, you know, I'm so sorry about that. I'm so sorry about what happened and my role in it as a white person. And then she took a breath and she said, but you should not be doing this. You should be getting an education. You should be moving forward in your lives, not doing this kind of thing. And then ensued a long conversation with my mother, advising them on how to improve their lives. They stopped off twice to buy water for my father, who's diabetic and his mouth had become dry. And finally, they dropped my parents home at my father's nursing home. Now, when I started telling people the story about my mother and what she had done in that car, people remarked, "My God, Murray, your mother sounds amazing." And I said, "Well, no, you've got to be mistaken here. My mother is far from amazing. She was a very neglectful mother. She wasn't there to hover over us like all the other mothers after school every day. She was a concert pianist. She was either practicing or teaching or playing in concerts at night. My mother wasn't there for us." And this was my lament during 30 years of therapy. But people said, "No, come on, you must have the wrong picture here. Your mother sounds great. I mean, imagine having such a hero as your mother." And so I began to wonder, perhaps they're right. Perhaps they've got a point. And so I went back to South Africa and spent 3 weeks with my mother. On the very first night of my arrival in Johannesburg, my mother sat opposite me at the kitchen counter. And she said, "Darling, you don't really know me, do you?" And she was right. I didn't know her. I didn't know how much music meant to her and why she had, against all odds, pursued her career as a musician, even though she was criticized by many family members and many friends not to be there, like all the other women of her generation, for their husbands and their children. 3 weeks later, I accompanied my mother to Cape Town for the 10th anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And she told her story of how she had communicated with these carjackers to a group of thousands of people who were there to commemorate this large event. And sitting next to my mother was Bishop Desmond Tutu. And when my mother had finished telling her story, Bishop Tutu rose to his feet, lifted his hands into the air, and said, "God bless this woman." I had a chance to get to know my mother, to hear her story. She may well have been killed during that carjacking event, and I would never have got to know her. Getting to know my mother, listening to her story, transformed me. It transformed my relationship with my mother and has had ripples across my family and now into the World Mother Storytelling Project. In all the work that I've done after the carjacking, I've noticed the untold stories of mothers and what happens when these stories get told, how it rejuvenates the teller, and how it puts a whole new heartfelt energy into the world. This is the origin of the World Mother Storytelling Project, and I invite you to join our movement.